Very good morning. You're watching NewsX and I'm Shivani Singh. We are tracking the latest developments regarding the meeting that is in fact taking place between US President Donald Trump and the Chinese President Xi. Now, President Donald Trump is in Beijing for a high-stakes two-day summit with Chinese President Xi, and this is their first face-to-face meeting in China since 2017. Trump arrived on Wednesday, and on Thursday he received a grand welcome ceremony at the Great Hall of the People, including a handshake with Xi, national anthems and troop review, with both the leaders projecting warmth and optimism for stronger bilateral ties amid global tensions, with the agenda centers on trade, extending the 2025 truce, boosting US agriculture, energy, aircraft exports, rare earth access and possible board of trade mechanisms. The Iran conflict is also supposed to be discussed, and Trump also wants to press China to help reopen the Strait of Hormuz and also influence Tehran. And the Taiwan-US arms sales also may be on the negotiating table, and Beijing's red lines on independence. Now, accompanied by CEOs like Elon Musk, Tim Cook and Jensen Huang, Trump has actually sought quick economic wins while Xi prioritizes stability and concessions. No major breakthroughs have been announced as of yet, as the talks continue with a Temple of Heaven visit and state banquet. And now expectations lean towards incremental deals rather than sweeping agreements in a competitive but managed relationship. Let me in fact go across and take a look at how the US media is covering the Beijing summit, because this will help us give you a perspective of how foreign media is actually looking at this coverage. It's a very big day for the US. It's coming after 9 years when US President Donald Trump is in fact in Beijing. So let's look at how the US media is looking at this meeting. The New York Post, the headline says that Trump greets Xi in Beijing to kick off historic China summit with grand welcome ceremony. So obviously they're starting off the grand welcome ceremony that has been accorded to US President Donald Trump, and they have stated here that Trump and Xi stood shoulder to shoulder outside China's Great Hall of the People. This is a massive Communist Party showpiece overlooking the Tiananmen Square during the lavish arrival ceremony. Now remember that the Tiananmen Square is a very important aspect of Chinese history as well. That's where the revolution and the photo, that iconic photograph, also had been captured. So this hall is of great significance, and that's where the Chinese president is hosting US President Donald Trump. So obviously very important. They have also mentioned the handshake, which marks the 7th face-to-face meeting between Trump and Xi, and the pair's first meeting in China since November 2017. Now they are expected to talk about bilateral ties as well. So this is what the New York Post is in fact focusing on. Now let's look at how the New York Times is covering this. As their leaders meet, American and Chinese people are drifting apart. So they have focused on the people-to-people ties, and they are stating that even though the leaders are together, there seems to be a certain disconnect between the people of China and America. So they've stated that when China's current leader Xi actually toured the United States in 2015, he received a football jersey from high schoolers and promised to encourage more tourism between the two countries. So that's in 2015 Xi had promised that yes, he will promote tourism. However, there seems to be few such displays of bilateral bonhomie in store when Mr. Trump is actually in Beijing, and this actually reflects a grim reality of the US-China relations now, because tensions have grown and we are seeing a much more fractured geopolitical world. So obviously China and US have been seeing some kind of a tension because of the tariffs as well, because of the US-Iran-Israel war as well, and we see some sort of high stakes tension that is playing out between the two countries. But because of that, tourism and people to people connect is also suffering, and that's what the New York Times is actually focusing on in their article. Let's look at how CNN in fact is looking at this. So Xi and Trump hold high stakes summit in Beijing. Plain and simple, very factual reporting that they're going for. They've stated that it's obviously a very historic summit, and the Chinese leader Xi Jinping has stated that Trump and their countries continue to be partners rather than opponents. So they have focused on the statements, first statements that came out right before the negotiations started. We played that out for you as well, and this is how they've stated that this will focus on tech, on trade and on Taiwan. So they've mentioned that these are some of the issues that will in fact be discussed. However, one of the most important things that CNN has also highlighted is that there does not appear to be a single woman involved in the talks on either the US or the Chinese side. So that's a big anomaly that has in fact come to the fore. No woman on either side of the negotiating table. Let's look at how these negotiations will then pan out over here, and women are underrepresented in the highest levels of government in both Beijing and Washington. Neither the US nor China have ever had a female leader. So that goes on to say how both the countries in fact are also progressing further regarding equal rights, regarding women's rights and women, the presence of women in the highest corridors of power. All right, let's look at Fox News, how they are covering it. They have stated that Marco Rubio says that US will push China to take a more active role in Iran negotiations ahead of the Trump-Xi summit. So they have in fact taken out a statement that was given out by Marco Rubio. He was aboard the Air Force One. Remember that Marco Rubio is also one of these individuals who have been sanctioned by China earlier. Now his presence on Chinese soil comes as a very big concession from Beijing, and he has made this statement that this meeting is very important because US will want to look at more a bigger role of Beijing in fact in the Iran negotiations. So Marco Rubio has stated that the US officials will attempt to persuade China to take a more active role in resolving the conflict in Iran as these two leaders are meeting. Remember that this conflict has been long drawn. US President Donald Trump has been stating, yes, this will end right now, yes, it will end in a few weeks, but they haven't been able to do so. China seems to have a greater leverage on Tehran than Washington, and they will want to play over it. Let's look at how the Washington Post in fact is reporting on this. They're stating that facing headwinds at home, Trump signals eagerness to make deals at the China summit. Now we know how Trump is facing a lot of backlash because of the US-Iran-Israel war at home. His approval ratings have gone down. His statements have also invited a lot of criticism over there back at home. And this, when he's making this huge visit to China after 9 years, he will obviously be a little more eager to make sure that deals do come through. So this is what the Washington Post is in fact highlighting. Let's look at how the Wall Street Journal is reporting this. Trump and Xi begin a superpower summit on trade and war. So the Wall Street Journal hasn't minced its word. It's called both US and China as superpowers, and they are stating that this summit will focus on trade and war. And they have said that they will also be thorny discussions on the table, and the war's the shadow obviously looming large during this. However, they have highlighted again these opening comments that they are in fact partners and not rivals. So there you have it, some of the coverage from US organizations, media organizations over here. and this is something that we are in fact tracking for you. Let me also introduce the guest who's joining us right now, Ambassador KP Fabian, who is a former diplomat. Thank you so much, sir, for taking out your time and for speaking to NewsX. Ambassador, obviously an overview of this entire summit that we are looking at. Do you believe that US President Donald Trump is in a position to make deals where US is on an equal standing with China, or do you believe he is coming in through this with some sort of compromises that he might have to make, sir?
Thank you for a very good question. President Trump went to Beijing last in 2017. Now, during the 9 years, China has grown stronger and more assertive. There cannot be any doubt about it. Now, I see a profound infusion of thinking among certain circles in the West when they say that China will lean on Iran regarding the Strait of Hormuz and impress upon Iran the need to come to the table and discuss matters with America and put an end to the present crisis. I'm afraid they are making a mistake. It is my view that Iranian foreign minister, since he was in Moscow and in Beijing, before Iran sent that written reply to the United States, it is highly possible that Iran would have coordinated with both Moscow and Beijing about the reply. In other words, the perception that Iran is isolated is wrong. Both Moscow and Beijing are behind Iran. It is not that they would lend Iran military support in a very direct way, and they will never do that, because that will be a world war. And thank God they won't do that. But short of that, China and Russia are with Iran, and President Trump, as you also mentioned, is in a very difficult situation. In fact, I would say that there is a checkmate in Iran, and President Trump is being checkmated. And as we all know, the word checkmate comes from Shama, that is Iranian word. So for Trump to be checkmated in Iran is quite ironic, because I am reasonably certain that Xi Jinping will and Trump will agree on the trade matters, soybean imports, NVIDIA, semiconductor chips and all that. But Xi Jinping will make it very clear in his own manner that should Trump start bombing Iran again, well, the soybean imports will slow down. So I take it that it's a good thing that these two are meeting, and we might expect a speedy end to the Iran and Strait of Hormuz crisis.
Absolutely, Ambassador. Some very valid points raised by you and an interesting perspective. I'll request you to stay on with us as I move to another guest who's joining us on this broadcast, Mr. Sanjay Gupta, who's an economist. Thank you, sir, for taking out your time as well. A very good morning to you. Mr. Gupta, how are you viewing this, summit? Because trade is obviously a big focus. The US is trying to, take that $500 billion deal over there with Beijing, make sure that agricultural deals are also struck. There's also talk about, rare earth metals, energy, and AI and semiconductors. So how are the two biggest economies then looking at this historic summit, Mr. Gupta?
I am not very hopeful of any conclusions or any big deals coming out of that, though President Trump is on the back foot, and he will try every effort to do something to please the U.S. Citizens and the people over there whose backlash he is continuously facing due to that Iran war. And I am not very hopeful of any big announcements, say, regarding that. It is though he is taking along with him a very large number of business contingent with him.
Right. So do you believe that maybe US, there is also a lot of talk that the US will agree to a lot of concessions. They will soften its stance on Taiwan. They will maybe look at some other issues like the South China Sea. They'll soften their stance and then get these deals through. Do you believe that that can be something that we will look forward to? Because US is trying to corporatize their entire foreign policy as well.
See, President Trump, when imposed the raised tariffs, and China has been on the very big tariffs have been imposed on the China itself along with the India. So the trade war is already going on, and President Trump is trying to soften it due to the pressure of the Iran war. He may concede to some concessions with him. Maybe Taiwan, maybe not on the list, because U.S. have been very critical on that issue. I think on rare earth metals and on opening of some American markets or lowering of the tariffs maybe on the agenda, and that too to please China to intervene in the Iran war for some peace solutions.
All right, Mr. Gupta. In fact, let me also go across to Ambassador Fabian if he's still with us on this broadcast. Ambassador, obviously, like you mentioned, that the Iran war is a thorny subject between the two countries that is likely to be discussed, that is likely to in fact play a big role in how these negotiations actually shape up for the US. Marco Rubio, sir, a once sanctioned individual in China, is now in Beijing, present along with the president's delegation. He has stated that the US officials will try to negotiate and they will try to make sure that the Beijing actually plays a greater role in leveraging its ties with Tehran. Do you believe that through this there can be some sort of a conclusion to the US-Iran-Israel war?
Put it this way, Iran plays chess. So all the demands they have put up now, suppose they have put up 6 demands, you do not expect all the 6 demands to be met. So out of 6, if 3 or 4 are met, that is good enough. And therefore, it is possible for China to nudge Iran a little. But basically, let's understand, there is a nexus static nexus between Iran and Russia and China, and to an extent, North Korea also is included in this nexus. Don't forget that in 2021, China signed a contract with Iran to invest $400 billion over a period of 25 years, against which China will receive oil from Iran at a concession rate. So China has already invested a lot by way of infrastructure, and certainly China wouldn't like to see all that destroyed by American bombing. So China is firmly with Iran. There is no doubt about it, and it will use its influence a little bit on Iran to be a little less silent, because IRGC can be a little difficult. But basically, let me say that Trump is playing poker and Iran is playing chess.
Very interesting, Ambassador. All right, that's all the time that we have to discuss this, but I thank you, Ambassador and Mr. Gupta, for